Picture the city of Strasbourg in July 1518. A prosperous jewel of the Holy Roman Empire. The midsummer air is heavy and sweltering. The kind that clings to your skin and thickens every breath. Merchants are setting up their stalls. Their tables heavy with bread, fruit, and salted meat. Bakers call out their prices. Children run between the stalls in play. And church bells toll softly above the chatter of the square. The city seems alive with the rhythm of ordinary life, until one woman disrupts it forever. Fra Trofia steps into a narrow street. Wearing a simple dress already damp from the heat. Neighbors greet her casually, unaware that they are about to witness something that would stain their memories for the rest of their lives. Without warning, she begins to move. At first, it might appear like a dance, her limbs jerking, her feet stamping the cobblestones, but there is no grace. No rhythm, no music guiding her. This is not a performance. It is an assault upon her own body. Her arms flail in unnatural directions, like a puppet tugged by drunken strings. Her legs pound the stones with such force that chips of rock scatter at her feet. She sweats furiously, her hair plastered to her forehead, and yet she cannot pause to wipe her brow. Her shoes darken with blood as her feet tear beneath the relentless pounding. What horrifies her neighbors most is not just the violence of her movement but the look in her eyes. They are wide, desperate, pleading, as if she is fully conscious of what is happening, yet utterly powerless to stop it. Witnesses rush forward. Some try to steady her, to hold her arms still. She wrenches free, spinning, kicking, clawing at the air as though possessed by invisible hands. Others bring her water, which she tries to drink without ceasing her movements. Most of it splashes uselessly down her chin and chest, soaking her already damp clothing. As the sun reaches its peak, sweat streams off her in sheets, creating dark, wet circles around her thrashing feet. She cries out at times, broken words in German, desperate prayers for God to free her, but the motion continues. Her body no longer obeys her mind. Hours pass. The crowd swells. By afternoon, dozens of onlookers press into the narrow lane, murmuring their theories. Some whisper that she is cursed, struck by a witch's spell. Others argue she has been seized by demons, her body a battleground for Satan's delight. A few suggest a more earthly explanation: poisoned bread, rye infected with strange molds that twist the mind and body. But none can explain why she dances without pause, her face pale with exhaustion, her lips cracked, her limbs trembling but refusing to rest. As evening falls, torches and lanterns are lit, and still Fra Trofia dances. Her neighbors, now terrified, take turns watching over her. They bring blankets when she shivers even as sweat pours down her face. They try to feed her bread, but she cannot chew and swallow while her body convulses. Priests begin to pray aloud, their chants mixing with the sound of her feet stamping on the stone. Some kneel and cross themselves, convinced they are witnessing a divine punishment sent upon the city. The night is restless. Families cannot sleep, for the sound of her movements echoes through the streets, the thud of feet, the scrape of stone, the occasional gasp of pain. Each time she falters, her body seems to lurch forward again, as though driven by a force beyond human will. She becomes, in the words of one later chronicler, a prisoner within her own flesh, condemned to dance in a hell without music. By dawn, the city is restless with rumors. News spreads from stall to stall, church to church. A woman dances without rest, as if chained to motion itself. Some mock her, others pity her, but all are drawn by a mix of dread and fascination. And as the sun rises on her second day of torment, Strasbourg does not yet realize that Fra Trofia's solitary nightmare is about to consume the city. The second morning should have brought relief, but instead, it brought escalation. Fra Trofia was not alone anymore. A neighbor named Klaus, who had spent much of the night watching her agonized dance, began to feel an odd restlessness in his own legs. At first, it was only a nervous tapping of his foot against the floor. Then a subtle twitch he couldn't control. By midday, Klaus staggered into the same street where Fra Trofia arrived, his body surrendering to an irresistible compulsion. Unlike her violent thrashing, his movements resembled a warped ballroom dance. He held out his arms as if embracing a phantom partner, spinning and stepping to a rhythm no one else could hear. Now two figures twisted in the sweltering heat. Their motions grotesque mirrors of celebration turned nightmare. A crowd quickly gathered, larger than the day before. Street vendors abandoned their stalls. Priests left their duties at the cathedral. Even officials came to witness the strange scene. Whispers surged through the throng. Was this divine punishment? Or Satan's trickery? Some crossed themselves in fear. Others stood mesmerized, unable to look away. By the third day, 6 more citizens had succumbed. By the end of the week, more than 30 men and women of Strasbourg were caught in this bizarre torment. And the sight was both horrifying and eerily varied. Some danced like Fra Trofia, thrashing wildly with bloodied feet and gasping breaths. Others swayed in rhythmic patterns, as though hearing music that had never been played. A few raised their arms in military salutes, stepping high and stiff as if obeying phantom drummers. Others clapped and stomped in grotesque echoes of peasant festival dances. Yet, despite their differences, one feature bound them all: the eyes. Each dancer's face revealed not joy but terror, wide, pleading eyes that betrayed their awareness of what was happening, even as their bodies refused to obey their minds. Neighbors wept watching their loved ones trapped in this endless torment. Children screamed as mothers and fathers collapsed, only to rise again and keep moving. What disturbed observers most was the pattern of the spread. It wasn't random. Those who spent the longest time watching often found themselves next to join. Families who nursed afflicted relatives discovered, to their horror, that within days they too were compelled to dance. It was as if the plague passed not through touch, nor through food or air, but through sight, an infection of the mind that leapt from one pair of eyes to another. A physician present in the city, Johann Weyer, left behind words that chill even centuries later. I have seen plagues of the body that consume flesh and bone. But this is a plague of the soul. It spreads from eye to mind to limb, and it makes of men not corpses, but slaves of motion they cannot comprehend. The city, once filled with the cheerful noise of bells, merchants, and chatter, now throbbed with a new rhythm, the ceaseless pounding of feet on stone, the ragged cries of exhaustion, and the eerie silence of onlookers who knew, deep down, that simply watching might draw them into the dance. By the close of July's first week, Strasbourg stood on the brink of hysteria. Ordinary citizens no longer trusted their own bodies. A twitch in the leg, a sudden urge to tap one's foot, could mean the beginning of the same unholy compulsion. Parents pulled their children indoors. Shutters were drawn, but nothing seemed to stop the spread. What began as one woman's torment had become a contagion of movement, an epidemic without precedent. One that would soon force the city's leaders into desperate and disastrous decisions. By the second week of the strange outbreak, panic was rising. Dozens of citizens were caught in the endless dance, staggering through the streets like marionettes cut from their strings yet still forced to move. Shops stood half empty, work slowed to a halt, and rumors filled every corner of Strasbourg. People whispered of curses, divine punishments, and the devil walking among them. The city council, pressed by priests and desperate citizens, convened to find a solution. After consulting with local physicians and theologians, the officials reached a conclusion that now seems absurd. The dancers were not victims of possession or poison but of overheated blood. According to the medical understanding of humors, their blood was too hot and turbulent, producing a feverish compulsion to move. The cure, they decided, was simple: let them dance until the sickness burned itself out. This decision marked the beginning of Strasbourg's gravest mistake. Rather than restrain or isolate the afflicted, the council ordered more music. Musicians were hired, drums and fiddles brought into the city square. Carpenters were paid to build a wooden stage where the dancers could perform in full view of the public. Citizens who could still stand were encouraged to join in, the theory being that proper, structured dancing might help the afflicted find rhythm and thus be cured. What followed was nothing less than a descent into chaos. When the first notes of music rang out over the square, the dancers seemed electrified. Their movements grew sharper, faster, more violent, as if the external rhythm overpowered what little resistance their bodies still had. The sound of fiddles and pipes became chains, binding them even deeper into their torment. Professional dancers, brought from neighboring towns to teach proper steps, soon found themselves infected as well. One by one, they too lost control, spinning helplessly into the throng. The wooden stage, intended as a place of healing, became a theater of horror. Spectators crowded around its edges, drawn by morbid fascination, only to find themselves twitching, swaying, then staggering into the circle. Musicians, who dared not stop for fear of angering the dancers, played until their arms trembled and their instruments cracked. Some collapsed from exhaustion, yet even then their tunes echoed in the minds of those who watched, compelling more feet to join the frenzy. The square transformed into something Dante himself might have envisioned, a seething mass of bodies stamping, spinning, writhing, and collapsing, day and night without pause. The air stank of sweat, blood, and despair. The cries of the exhausted rose with the beat of drums, until the sound carried through the entire city. Travelers arriving at Strasbourg spoke of hearing the infernal rhythm from miles away. But the true horror lay in the speed of its spread. Families who avoided the square were not spared. Some reported that the faint strains of music drifting through their shutters were enough to trigger the same compulsion. A child's nervous clapping, a worker's rhythmic hammering, each small beat risked awakening the curse in another victim. Strasbourg had tried to cure the dance with more dancing, and in doing so had turned a mystery into a full-blown catastrophe. By the end of the second week, the number of afflicted had risen past 100. The city, once a proud center of trade, resembled a fevered carnival where joy had curdled into madness. Priests warned that the devil himself was conducting the dancers like a cruel maestro. Physicians scribbled notes in confusion, unable to reconcile what they saw with the teachings of Galen. And the city leaders, who had hoped to control the plague through spectacle, realized too late that they had unleashed a far greater nightmare. The weeks dragged on, and Strasbourg was consumed by the relentless rhythm of suffering. What had begun as a grotesque curiosity now revealed itself as a true public health disaster. The human body is not built for unbroken motion. Muscles tear, joints grind, the heart strains like an overworked bellows. For the dancers of Strasbourg, there was no reprieve, no chance to rest, no escape from their body's betrayal. The first death was Frau Trophia herself. After more than a week of ceaseless thrashing, she collapsed mid-spin, her limbs still jerking even as her consciousness slipped away. Witnesses swore her body continued twitching for minutes after she had drawn her final breath, as though the dance itself had outlived her. The official record listed her cause of death as exhaustion of the heart. But to those who watched, it seemed far more sinister. She had literally danced herself to death. And she was only the beginning. Within days, others followed. Some collapsed from heart failure, their chests seizing after hours of relentless pounding. Others suffered strokes, the blood in their skulls bursting vessels from the strain. Still more wasted away, unable to eat or drink properly, choking on food as their bodies refused stillness even long enough to swallow. Physicians described men and women who staggered with bloodied feet worn down to raw flesh, their shoes little more than shredded leather soaked in crimson. The horror deepened with the arrival of physician Paracelsus, who documented what he called dance fever. He wrote of bodies so overheated by exertion that the skin burned with fever, eyes glassy with delirium. Dancers hallucinated visions. Some saw saints urging them on. Others claimed to hear choirs of angels, or worse, demons mocking them with unearthly laughter. The afflicted shouted prayers mid-step, cried out for mothers long dead, or screamed into the air as if locked in invisible combat. One account tells of a man who danced until his hips dislocated, his body collapsing sideways in grotesque angles. Yet even on the ground, he continued to writhe in a parody of dance, until his voice went silent and his breath stopped. Another speaks of a woman whose legs gave way entirely, muscles torn from the bone, but whose arms kept flailing long after she was lowered into the dirt. Those who survived longer did so at terrible cost. With no rest, their bodies consumed themselves, muscles ate away at fat, then began devouring their own fibers. Some grew skeletal and hollow-eyed, their faces stretched in masks of terror, their hands clawed as if grasping at salvation just out of reach. Families wept as they tried to tend to them, pressing bread against their lips, wiping sweat from their brows, praying for a miracle. And yet, miracles did not come. Night after night, the torches of Strasbourg burned as the dancers stamped their lives away in the city square. The music that was meant to cure them became a death knell, echoing across the rooftops like a cruel liturgy. Merchants shuttered their stalls. Farmers avoided the markets. The city's economy faltered, for who could sell, buy, or work when neighbors collapsed dead in the street to the beat of invisible drums? By the end of July, the death toll numbered in the dozens. Hundreds more remained trapped in the unending movement. Gaunt and trembling, caught between life and death, Strasbourg itself had become an open-air inferno, where bodies moved not in celebration, but in torment. The city now faced a terrifying truth. This was no passing madness. This was a plague that killed not with pestilence, but with the sheer impossibility of stopping. And unless something changed, Strasbourg would dance itself into ruin. When the plague reached its peak, Strasbourg stood on the edge of collapse. Dozens were already dead, hundreds more staggered in the grip of the curse. And the city's leaders, who had tried music, stages, and professional dancers, were left with nothing but questions. What was this thing? Why had it struck here, at this moment, and why could no one resist it? The people of 1518 reached for explanations in the frameworks they knew best. For priests and monks, the answer was clear. It was demonic possession. The devil himself pulling the strings of Strasbourg's citizens. Holy relics were brought out, prayers intoned over the writhing bodies. But the dancers did not stop. One notorious inquisitor, Father Heinrich Kramer, author of Malleus Maleficarum, the Hammer of Witches, arrived in Strasbourg and declared that witches had cursed the city. He called for purges and executions, though the council hesitated, fearing bloodshed would bring only more chaos. Physicians leaned on the logic of humors, diagnosing hot blood that needed to be cooled by dancing itself. Others suggested poisoned bread, rye infected with ergot, a fungus that produces hallucinations much like LSD. The theory seemed plausible, but it could not explain why the condition spread by sight, not by food. Some whispered of melancholia, a deep despair that turned inward and erupted as self-destruction. Astrologers pointed to a recent comet, claiming that strange stars had poisoned the air and inflamed the city's humors. None of these explanations satisfied the fear gnawing at the people. They watched neighbors collapse, watched families destroyed, and knew only that this was something beyond their grasp. The plague had exposed how fragile their understanding of body and soul truly was. Centuries later, modern scholars are no less fascinated and unsettled. The dominant theory is mass psychogenic illness, what we might call mass hysteria. Strasbourg in 1518 was a city under immense strain. Famine had scarred its people. Disease lingered in its streets. Poverty and political unrest crushed its poorest citizens. In such an atmosphere, the mind itself can revolt. A single woman's trauma might ignite a spark that spreads through crowds like fire through dry grass. The body responds to unbearable stress with compulsions it cannot control. And the sight of one person trapped in such torment can trigger the same in others. But this is not the only possibility. Some scholars suspect neurological disease, perhaps an early viral infection that attacked motor control in the brain. Others argue it was a form of conversion disorder, psychological pain manifesting as uncontrollable physical symptoms. Still others suggest that what began as ergot poisoning or seizures was transformed into something more terrifying by the power of collective suggestion. And then there is the most chilling theory of all, social contagion. Ideas, emotions, and behaviors can spread as surely as disease. We see it even now, viral challenges that compel people to harm themselves for spectacle. Panics that leap from one mind to another across the invisible web of social connection. The dancing plague of 1518 may have been one of the first recorded cases of an idea becoming physically contagious. The strangest fact remains. No single theory explains why the dancing began, why it spread so widely, or why it ended when it did. The mystery has endured for 500 years. And perhaps that is the most haunting truth of all. Strasbourg's plague reveals the terrifying fragility of human nature, the way mind and body can betray us when the world becomes unbearable. The people of Strasbourg learned these lessons through blood, sweat, and death. Their city became a stage for humanity's darkest truths, that under pressure, under fear, under the grinding weight of despair, entire communities can lose control of themselves. And in that loss of control lies both horror and warning. The dance ended in 1518. But the forces that unleashed it, the stresses, the contagion of ideas, the fragile line between mind and body, still remain. And they whisper to us across the centuries. A warning that we too may one day find ourselves moving to a rhythm we cannot resist.